We have a very important guest today, August Cole. He's a well-known writer, and he's specialized in science fiction and in political science fiction. And this is our opportunity to ask him about why it's important for or international relations scholars to read literature and to read science fiction.
Science fiction and even science fiction themed films and video games can be incredibly valuable to international relations scholars, as well as military and government officials, because it allows us to really understand the human element when it comes to the future environments that we're really starting to see take shape today. The aspects of a good novel or short story that I think are useful really ultimately come down to creating a very engaging way to relate to a set of themes, but also characters and individuals who represent them that enable the kind of connection to ideas, not only in their immediate sense, but rather the second and third order effects too, that allow for a much clearer and more complete picture. Being able to write such stories as well, I think, is also of use for even scholars who may not ordinarily consider that part of what they do professionally. And that's because, storytelling is one of the oldest human technologies, like fire, that has proven again and again to be very effective at sharing ideas. And the power of ideas today, we know, is so great and only growing, particularly as many of us are searching to understand, what is ahead as we start to understand the true potential of technologies like artificial intelligence. We're also going to have to start to consider what the implications of new breakthroughs in bioengineering will be, not only in our commercial world, but also in societies, but also to the field of conflict. And these aspects all come together, I think, and point to the relevance of story-driven narratives, what I often call FICINT, like fictional intelligence, that enables people to connect with ideas and share ideas in much different ways than, say, a PowerPoint presentation, a white paper, or even an academic article.
August, this is your last book that I'm reading, or listening in this case, Burnin, and all the things you are telling us, I think they are in the book, at least in the first chapters. So, what can you say about this new book?
Burnin is, in many ways, a new kind of novel. It picks up on the type of fiction that we wrote in Ghost Fleet and explores the issues around artificial intelligence and robotics as they will be playing out, not just in America, but all over the world in the next 2 decades. Fundamentally, it's a story about an FBI counterterrorism agent, Laura Keegan, who's working with a robot partner for the first time in the first use of an autonomous robot in law enforcement to hunt down a technology, to hunt down a terrorist who's trying to exploit the seams and strife in America over the transformations in future society caused by economic impacts from artificial intelligence and robotics. What makes Burnin unique is it's a thriller novel. It's very fast paced. You can read it, over a weekend while at the beach, but it also has, hundreds of endnotes. And those endnotes are a way to share with the reader that we are serious in how we both research, but also how we want to communicate the value of the work of others too, in understanding the relevance to figuring out these almost existential questions about technology. Burnin is a book that we hope will connect with people who are interested in the future of AI and robotics, but also trying to understand the human-machine relationship, which is core to the story.
Each time has his writers, science fiction writers, and how they are seeing the world in those days. Can you say something about these writers, like Isaac Asimov, for instance?
One of the writers who has been most influential to me in how I think about the future, but also in, I think, aspirationally how I would like to write, is William Gibson, an American writer who lives in Canada now, but has essentially pioneered really important concepts, not just in science fiction, but in all of society. The term cyberpunk, and really visualizing what the internet looked like back in the 1980s and 90s was something that Gibson specialized in. And what I think was really wonderful about his work is that it's very gritty and very raw, and that he doesn't assume that a world that is transformed by technology is necessarily going to be better for everybody. And that kind of unflinching approach to depicting the kinds of futures that he did in books like Count Zero. Most recently, his two novels, the most recent called Agency is a sequel to The Peripheral, do a great job of introducing us to technologies like quantum tunneling, which effectively allows telepresence, across time, and also the human machine dynamics that go with real, like, generalized artificial intelligence. And that's all done in a way that follows the really, really excellent principles of storytelling, where you have compelling characters that essentially following them on a journey that you just can't put down. And so I think that, to me, speaks to the kind of writer that I can both find inspiration from intellectually, but also creatively too.
Okay, well, my last question is this. You talk about one writer, very important. What do you suggest, three writers or books for a scholar who's starting a career that he or she should read?
Sure, I can think of a very long list, but I'll try to narrow it down. So I would actually put The Peripheral by William Gibson as one of those books to read. Again, for its imagination, but also its introduction to some really important technologies. The second would be Liu Cixin, a Chinese science fiction writer, has written a book called The Three-Body Problem, which is a trilogy, but it effectively deals with first contact with an alien race, and kind of not just what is important about the idea of aliens coming to Earth, but rather how the humans react. And the storyline is genius because it follows this arrival, which happens in effectively slow motion. It takes hundreds of years for these aliens to get here. So what human society does in the interim is fascinating. And I think another book I would really suggest is called The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. It's a little more fantasy than science fiction, but it's fascinating for those who are trying to understand societies in and around cities. Imagine a kind of contest between good and evil that plays out as effectively battles between forces of, like, a darkness in the universe and individuals who manifest the entire power of a city like New York, like Rio de Janeiro. It's a really, really cool construct, and I think does some really smart demonstration of how you can use fiction to encapsulate modern issues of race, of gender, of sociology, of economics in a story that is quite actually fast paced, and incredibly creative and surprising. I'm really, really pleased with how much I've liked that book, as someone who doesn't ordinarily read books that skew towards that fantasy side.
August, this is the last question, but it's a kind of an exercise of imagination. You are able to give a gift, a book, to a president of the world. Could be President Trump, could be Putin, could be whoever you choose. Could be one of your books or one of the classics that you mentioned. Can you pick up a book and a leader to give a gift to understand the world, or whatever you think?
Well, it may be obvious if I pick Burnin, but I would love to give Burnin to the next president of the United States, whoever wins the election in November, to get them to take seriously the potentially dangerous elements that go with not responding and preparing for an era in which artificial intelligence and automation transform society. America is, as anyone can see, going through a really difficult period right now with a lot of division. And the economic aspects and sociological aspects of that are very real. And I fear that the world that is going to be created as artificial intelligence displaces more jobs, robotics as well, will be more fractured and potentially even more chaotic. And that's something I think not only for our country I want to avoid, but also for the world, especially at a time when China is rising. So I would love to sit down with a leader who's read that book and have that conversation about how to help them potentially better prepare for a world in which artificial intelligence and robotics will wholly transform society.
Mr. August Cole, thanks for your time to give us to Consejo Argentino para Relaciones Internacionales. Thanks for your time, August.
Thank you for having me.